So welcome to the Future Cities Catapult and to the launch of our old but new initiative, City Standards Network. I'm Jarmo Eskelinen, Chief Innovation and Technology Officer of the Catapult, and happy to be the executive sponsor of our standards work, and I'll also be your moderator today, so we all double task here. It's an efficient organization. We have 2.5 hours of tight program ahead of us, and in order to prevent you guys from kind of zooming out, after each speaker, I give you an opportunity to ask a question or two. If you don't, I will anyway. So it's better that you do, because I'm speaking enough without even holding the questions for myself. And we have a group of introductions and presentations first, and then a little interactive session to close the day off. Here's who's everybody, and the reason for the workshop in the end is that we are launching a City Standards Network, and that of course means that we don't have it all figured out. So we want to talk about it with you guys and to double check that the ideas we have are any good, and then of course listen to you guys, because you probably have better ones even than we ever did. So that's the remit of the day. We of course do continue from the work we've done before. In the standards domain, we have been working with the British Standards Institution for a couple of years, running the City Standards Institute. And I think it's fair to say that because of the accomplishments of the UK City Standards people and the BSI, and to some extent also CSI, we are in a pretty good position when it comes for what kind of standards we have in the area of smart cities especially. But at the same time, we can say that same as everybody else, it's different to create standards and then to support standardization, and to be able to say that we actually run our cities in a standards-driven way to the extent they should be driven. And that, I think, is a sort of one of the core functions we want to manage with the City Standards Network, is to support standardization, not just standards creation, but sort of all kinds of utilization of interoperable solutions across our cities, reaching also outside then of the UK. So what is City Standards Network? What we want to do is to support the needs of cities and the industry through series of actions. Yes, developing new standards, the world is not ready, but very importantly, uptake of standards and uptake of harmonized interoperable urban solutions. We want to help cities and the industry to find the right standards to support them in what they want to achieve. And we want to help the standards organizations, not only in the UK, but very much abroad, to be aligned so that the standards they jointly create, or they create in their own respective areas, work as a whole. And there seems to be, based on the little crowdsourcing we've done, lots of need for that. So we aim to be kind of a neutral matchmaker, a bridge builder organization, both in the UK, but very much so between the UK scene and the city standards development scene outside of the UK. More like in a kind of network building way. I sometimes said that, if you think about networks as a plate, there are two ways to have a plate on a table. It can be upside down, and then you're on the top of the plate. But if you try to pour soup in, it all, just goes to the table. Or then it can be the table or the plate the right way around, and you are in the middle. You support the network, and when you pour the soup in, you are not higher than anybody else. Actually, you are kind of lower. But when you pour the soup in, it sticks. It stays there. And it's easier to eat the soup if it's on the plate than if it's on the table. So we see ourselves as a sort of a soup at the service of the standards developers of the UK and the cities and city developers abroad. Why that's needed? How do cities define their needs? They want reliable energy, clean air, efficient transport, healthy citizens support that, people in that. They want to prosper. And standards geeks talk about data standards and IoT standards and city management standards, process standards, construction, supply chain standards. And it looks like these two are not compatible, when actually they are. There just needs to be a bit of translation between the two, between helping the cities to understand that technical standards, different tools for interoperability actually do help them to achieve what they try to achieve, because one city is not a market and it's hellishly expensive to develop anything for just one city, which many cities are feeling in their purse. Makes sense to recycle and scale up and reuse. And at the same time, we who develop standards should be better to recognize the needs and the wishes and the kind of people talk which cities use when they describe their needs, and also to understand, even in the area of technical standards, which are the most valid ones for cities now, and which might be interesting but actually not that useful for cities. So have the dialogue between standards developers and the market. And maybe city standards is a bit different field from many other areas of standards, because in many other areas industry can develop standards fine just by themselves. But in here, in this domain, I think the demand side, the cities have to be around that table. They have to be in the table. And that's kind of maybe different from some other domains. So how we intend to do this? We have a tight team here, but quite a good reach. So we have a good comms engine and great networks in this country and abroad. And we are going to use that reach to support the City Standards Network, which is basically you guys and then everybody else out there in this domain. And for starters, we do have 3 people working on this, and I'm going to point them out because Katie just came in. So Katie Jumana here, stand up please. City Standards Coordinator, keeps all the threads in her hands. And then back there we have our City Standards Associate, Michael Malquin. It's a pretty well-known face in these circles. Sort of external ambassador of the domain. And then in here we have the guy who isn't even working for us yet, but soon will be, Gavin Summerson, City Standards Team Lead. Joining us from BSI on friendly terms in beginning of October. And we're trying to hijack as much of his time as we've managed already, but he's been a professional and not let us to do too much of that though. So managing the handovers and dipping in the new world of the Catapult network. That's who we are. And then, of course, most importantly, it's you guys, because the network, it isn't much of a network if you have 3 people. So there's our old partners, the BSI and the City Standards Institute network we worked with, and then all the other stakeholders of this domain who we want to support through this work. I think that kind of concludes my part. How this will work between the UK and international is that we intend to reach out in the UK to industry, as I said, to cities, and to government departments who work in this domain. So Linda Halloran is over there from the MHELC. We definitely want to support you guys in what you are doing. Then abroad, we want to work through city networks, and I could point out Open Agile Smart Cities Network. Davor Mersman will be speaking with you later. And different standards development organizations, SDOs, which are developing these standards to kind of build bridges between them, not claiming that they wouldn't do it themselves, but it's not their core job. But it will be a core job of us. And then the practicalities of that, we want to work those through with you in the workshop session today as well, to prioritize things. What do we need to do first? What should be kind of secondary, etc. Some ideas of what we're aiming to do: live database of standards, mapping tool for what's going on out there, case studies of good use of standards, terminologies for this space. There isn't one at the moment, and involving cities in this work, developing routes of best practice in adoption of standards, both de facto and de jure standards. So that kind of concludes the setting the scene part, and let's rehearse any questions for starters.
You haven't included sustainable finance as a key.
Good question. I can repeat it from here. Let's do that later. Have we included or haven't we included sustainable finance as a key area? Fair to say, at the moment, funding models, business models, finance models, not yet, but it's a good point and definitely should be. We haven't really narrowed down the areas of future work, but it hasn't been addressed in the current standards packages which are out there. One more.
Yeah, hi, that's Robert Sugar from Bristol, and my question is that why are you starting the network now and not maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, or why not in a year's time, in a year time? So what changed in the circumstances that you see that the timing is kind of now? Thank you.
The good one. I think the best answer to that, it seems to be this event became quite full in quite a short time. So there's lots of buzz around standardization, use of standards at this very moment. There wasn't that much maybe a year back, or maybe there was, but we didn't notice. But definitely now, there seems to be lots of overlapping, not very well coordinated activities, and that will, of course, that's the way of the world to some extent, but we can try to ease that at least through launching a networking activity. There's lots of development in this domain, and everybody seems to welcome. So we started by asking people, what do you think? Should there be a networking activity for kind of standards people out there? And the answer was quite overwhelmingly yes. And I think in a year's time it will be too late. Okay, let's move on to the first speaker, and we give the floor to the chair of the City Standards Institute first, who's also leads Digital Greenwich, Trevor Dolling.
Thank you, Jarmo. So Jarmo said a number of interesting things, he always does. He said, a city is not the market, and that's absolutely true. And he said, and I'm very encouraged that he did, that he wants cities at the table. And we want to be at the table, we don't want soup on that table. And I'm just going to talk very briefly why this is important to cities and what cities need. Jarmo also described the cities as being the demand side, and that's absolutely true, and I'm not sure people always necessarily understand that in the business community. If this is going to work, it needs businesses to deal with the supply, provide what is wanted, and it needs cities to buy. And at this moment, it's a very immature market. Still, we're saying it's a very immature market, and it's not working as well as it should. So I'm just going to outline really why in my opinion, and based upon some of the work that we've done, that cities need standards. Now, the first thing is, and I think everybody here is very familiar with this, the pressure on cities is enormous, greater than it's ever been. In the case, that's true throughout the world. In the case of London, an extra 1 million people in London in the next 20 years if the forecasts are correct. So some of the investment that we're seeing today, such as Crossrail, is really just dealing with today's pressures, not necessarily tomorrow's pressures. And this trend towards globalization, we know the predictions are correct that cities will have an extra 2.5 billion people living in them in the next 20, 30 years. By the end of this century, it's predicted that the largest city on this earth will be Lagos, with a population of around 80 million people. And more than 20 cities will have a population of more than 50 million. London today is about 9 million. So there's whether those forecasts are entirely correct or not is really not the point. The trend is absolutely clear. More and more people living in cities, more and more pressure on cities. And that pressure is particularly true on the environment, if you're looking through the prism of the sustainability, but also on finances. Two ways, both the finances to run our cities, and there's absolutely no question, if you kind of read in the press, that UK authorities, particularly the county councils at this time, are under extreme financial stress. Nottinghamshire technically is insolvent. But that's also true of other cities and other authorities as well. But also we need our cities to function properly for the benefit of the economy. I think it's roughly 80% of the world's GDP is generated in cities, and conveniently enough that 80% of the world's emissions are generated in cities. So if we care about our world, then it's critical that our cities work much better or as well as they possibly can. But also there's meeting the expectations of our residents. So this isn't all driven by the outside pressures. There is clearly a desire by cities, by city authorities to deliver services better. Cheaper, for sure, but also more effectively to meet the needs and the aspirations of the people that cities serve. And that last point is one that I won't dwell on, but really is the market opportunity, which, if you look back at the work that the government has done, you could almost say is the main driver, has been the main driver for government in supporting smart city innovation. It just in terms of the scale of the market opportunity for UK businesses, and the businesses here will be very well aware of that. Now, the next couple of slides is really just to stress this is not simple. This is not about a lamppost. This is not about LED. This is not about a smart parking app. This is about a systemic change in the way cities function and the way services are delivered. This is the Smart City Strategy from the authority I work for, and it covers mighty and meaty issues such as economic transformation, service transformation, digital infrastructure, citizen engagement, and skills. And crucially, the built environment, neighbourhoods and communities. Technology enables us to do things, but in isolation, it won't achieve the kind of paradigm shift that we need. We need to bring in the planners, the architects, the designers. And a lot of good work has been done. The author of PAS 181, there is a test later, but this is the answer to this particular question. PAS, publicly available specification, produced by the BSI in a different guise from what we're discussing here today, was probably the first and I think still a very, very useful standard. And that stresses that firstly, this is a guide to establishing strategies for smart cities and communities, and at the heart, that cities are looking to transform the way they've traditionally operated. Once again, this isn't about operating in a particular silo, a smart parking app or whatever. This is about moving away from unconnected silos to new operating models that drive innovation and collaboration across those silos. So if this is such a great idea, why hasn't it happened? And I think a lot of businesses are asking that question. They've got the solution to all cities' problems. Why is nobody buying on the kind of scale that people predicted? There's a whole host of reasons, and you can choose your favourite. But firstly, we must not emphasise the challenge that cities face, the pressure they are under. If you are facing a crisis, you send out the fire engines. You don't necessarily think about what's good for you in 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 years, or in some cases 20 or 30 years' time. So there needs to be an understanding of that, and that can often explain why it's difficult to engage with cities. They're dealing with the problems as they're confronted with today, and they're meaty problems about people's safety, about abuse, seriously important issues. But they also have a very real problem of resources, of funding this stuff. They have a lack of time, in some cases a lack of skills and a lack of knowledge about really what is being discussed, and certainly a degree of uncertainty that the solution is the right solution. Local authorities, city authorities spend a lot of money, historically have spent a lot of money on IT systems that haven't delivered what was promised. And they're very fearful that the same thing will happen again, such as vendor lock-in and being reliant on the vendor to solve the next problem which wasn't anticipated. Those problems can be overcome, but nonetheless they're a strong motivation. And also a degree of silo working. It's well expressed, but local authorities can often come up with a solution which will save someone else a lot of money, someone else in the health service a lot of money, but it's their budget that has to pay for it. And so the way budgets are constructed is a real problem. Money comes from government in pots, and it's very difficult to spend across those different pots. And then there's a whole issue of how much this costs and the rate of return on that investment, the business case. All that adds up to risk. Risk for local authorities, fear that they're making the wrong decision. There's also some practical issues like contractual arrangements and lock-in that they've already got. In some cases, it will vary from authority to authority, but in some cases we're talking about authorities that have let very large contracts to service integrators. And it really poses the question, who's driving this innovation? Is it the businesses, is it the city authorities, or is it the service integrators? Who do you engage with? Now, the question at hand, the homework set, was why do cities need standards? Now, I've outlined some of the problems, and I utterly believe that standards can help local authorities, city authorities come over some of those barriers. They can provide certainty and future-proof. One of the problems I have in my local authority is that I'm encouraging the council to go down a particular route. I know if in 3, 5, 10 years' time that route proves to be a very lonely path and nobody else is on it, then that's going to be very difficult for me and very difficult for the authority. We need a herd to be part of. We want to create that community of people doing the same thing, to learn from each other, and in the process create a much bigger market for the businesses to sell into. They can help accelerate the deployment of smart city innovation because they're removing risk, they're removing uncertainty. Whole issues around interoperability. People are very, very concerned, cities are very, very concerned that they cannot join this stuff up and they don't necessarily understand the language of how you join things up. Issues around the business case and issues around the business model can all be better informed by standards. Now, some of you, when I first got engaged in standards, I imagined that they were all very technical and were all equivalent of 3-pin plugs and VHS and Betamax. But in truth, they carry many, many different guises. And it's been pointed out to me that the audience for these is both leaders, managers, and technicians. And we need our standards to fit each of those different categories and be mindful of those things. So really, that's all I wish to say by way of context and introduction. I think there's about 1 minute for any questions. Thank you.
So, question for Trevor. Is Michael going to be the mic man? Quick feet are needed in that job. Let's to Andrew first.
Andrew Ross from Global Garden. The successful city financing models are ubiquitous. Copenhagen, California has done it. Gothenburg has issued 9 green bonds to connect together the cities. Why is there no green bond being issued in London?
I can't answer that question.
That's the hard bit. There's the money. Where are the projects?
But I can't answer that question. I don't know. I don't speak for London.
But that's one of the opportunities we have in the City Standards Network, to start to gather common issues and see what can be done about
But
it.
what I would say is that, although there's issues around funding, if there's a good proposition, then I've yet to find a barrier to finding the funding. So, green bonds provide an answer. So what is the problem that cities need to address?
Where are the projects?
Well, maybe those projects are being funded differently.
Gothenburg has issued 9 green bonds, and the City of Paris issued a €10 billion green bond
Okay.
4 years ago.
Okay, but
We got it.
that sounds like sounds like a standard.
There's a second question from there.
Do you think that there might be some danger in adopting widespread standards, in that those cities that are already successful and already forward-looking become more successful, and there's a twin track with those cities perhaps who don't have the skills or the insight or the strategic leadership, can't get on board with developing and complying with the standards?
Well, I think it's a really good question, because I think there is a real danger that there'll be a twin track approach. But I don't actually think that will be the fault of standards. I think standards can actually help that. I think, leaving aside standards, the objective has to be to ensure that cities continue to evolve, that those that are good get better at this stuff, and that more people are involved, more cities are involved. So the baseline for all cities improves. And my own feeling is that standards can play a key role in bringing everybody up, because the leaders can take a role in helping develop the standards, and then those that wish to consume the standards have them readily available. I think there is a danger that the community becomes just a community of those leading cities. And it's important that all cities, different sizes, different starting points, are part of the development of standards. They've got to say what is needed, not just the leading cities, the leading smart cities of the world.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tero. We can't... Sorry, we have to wait for the... have to keep the schedule, apologies. So we give the floor to MHGLC and Linda O'Halloran, who will be talking about the local digital declaration. That's exciting stuff.
Yes, I will. We have an awful name, the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government, and I am the head of the Local Digital Collaboration Unit. Long name, big mission. Need to work in the... There we go. Okay, so I am on the agenda here to talk about the Local Digital Declaration, which is an extremely related initiative and something that we hope will be a good lever, especially in the local government space, to help drive an awareness of what we mean by standards and to help incentivise their adoption and creation. But I think it's useful just to give a little bit more context as to where central government is at in this space, especially the department that's responsible for local authorities in some ways. I thought I'd start with our mission, and it really bears mentioning that this is the first year, like 2018 is the first year in a couple of years that our department has had any digital capacity. I actually worked in a program there called the Local Digital Program up until 2016, financial year 2015-16. Ran one of the first projects that was just trying to figure out how you identify common opportunities in local authorities, how you might move a very kind of brownfield service area like waste, collecting the bins, towards interoperability standards. And we made loads of progress in a year, and then the government was like, oh, this sounds a lot like us telling local authorities what to do. We should be, you're fired. And so off I went to GDS, the Government Digital Service, and so now it's a little bit like Groundhog Day, but it's refreshing to come back actually to a department that I was at before, because the atmosphere is completely different. We have a Chief Digital Officer, Paul Maltby, and I have fortnightly meetings with a minister who actually understands what we're talking about when we speak with him, so that's Rishi Sunak. So it's a very different vibe. And I also thought I'd tell you a little bit about what beyond my bit of the problem we're dealing in. So the new directorate, it's a pretty big thing. I don't know the total number, but we'll have about 40 people in it when it's done. And in addition to fixing internal technology and ways of working, there are 3 externally focused missions, all of which have a massive overlap with the City Standards Network agenda. So one of them is digital planning. It's more a policy-focused team. They've been working a lot with the Planning Innovation Network here, and they're trying to figure out what the policy levers are for improving planning services, for unlocking the potential of the plan-tech, prop-tech markets. And then we have a technical team led by Paul Downey, who's kind of one of the pioneer technical architects from Government Digital Service. They're currently in discovery, and their mission is to figure out what are the data problems, what are the barriers to improve planning service and kind of innovation in prop-tech and plan-tech. Based on, lack of access to data, poorly formatted data, things like that. And then the bit that we're in, the local digital collaboration unit, is kind of like the rest. The miscellaneous pile in some ways, so we have to be careful not to boil the ocean. But essentially our mission, and I think it's been referred to by both previous speakers, is that there are hundreds of local authorities. They all have to deliver similar looking services. Intuitively, it's kind of bananas that they would all have to do that independently of each other. And at the moment, they're stuck a little bit between a rock and a hard place, whereby they've outsourced a lot of their services to IT providers, and they don't have the knowledge necessarily to re-procure that in a way that will drive common standards, flexible ways of working, flexibility in the future, access to their own data without being charged an arm and a leg. And it's very, very expensive to build the alternative, because you're kind of, as Trevor mentioned, building something that should really work for everyone all on your own with your own internal budget. So this is the problem area that we're in, and our mantra, the kind of campaign hashtag that you should all tweet the bejesus out of, is fix the plumbing. There has been a huge amount of misunderstanding, and I've really felt it because I was involved in this program that was trying to figure out how you might build standards for a very kind of established local service. And then people didn't get it and we got shut down. A lot of people in local authorities are very scared that standards mean sameness. It means like central government coming along, building a single website, taking over, ruining everything. It means a lack of, our kind of local democracy being taken away from us, our ability to, really deliver local services might be threatened. So we have a massive education piece still. Times have really changed. 2016 is a totally different paradigm to 2018, and we're benefiting a lot. We have a bit of an open door in MHCLG to kind of run and achieve some stuff, and before they notice and try and shut us down again. So fix plumbing is our mantra. And our mission is to challenge the legacy IT market to behave more flexibly and openly. And how we're going to do this, in especially my bit, the local digital collaboration unit, which one day we'll figure out how to shorten, is fourfold. So the first thing is the declaration we've mentioned. In past incarnations, often the argument came back to us that, local authorities are so different, you couldn't possibly, fund common stuff. And that was just kind of a bit of a, I don't understand, so go away. Line that we're trying to mitigate with a common aspiration. So the declaration, I really encourage you to read it if you haven't seen it. Hands up who's actually seen it, just so I'm aware of. Oh, well done. Okay. So half the room, almost. It would have been a one-pager if we had less than 200 editors, but it's currently kind of 3 A4 pages. And it sets out what, in the internet age, a local service delivery organization should be trying to achieve. And importantly, it also lists it gets a bit technical, like specific commitments that we want every organization in this space to make. And there's a twofold mission to that. One is to help everyone get on the same page, show Treasury like, oh, look, but they're all saying the same thing. And to help the senior leaders that are less technical necessarily to understand what good looks like and what we mean. And it's also designed to give the doers, the people who've kind of been trying so hard to emulate the precedent set in GDS and to do things that they know are the right thing, to maybe encourage procurement to behave slightly differently and not renew the existing contract. We want to give them a bit of leverage to be like, look, 100 organizations have signed this, it's the right thing to do, you signed it, therefore we should be able to do this thing that's in commitment 12, why aren't you letting us do it? So that's the gist of the declaration. Importantly, one of the big things that we want you to kind of leave with in mind is that the declaration commits signatories to, from here on in, when procuring a new system or building something new, to abide by common standards where they exist and where they don't, be involved in their creation. The trick that we all have to figure out together is like, how do we create them in a way that everyone will be able to find them, and they'll be, they won't be preferential to some suppliers over others, they'll be truly open, etc. But this is, I think, one of the important levers, and it's a really important education piece for a sector that's, it's really well established, and often the leaders are leaders because they know so much about local services, but not necessarily a huge amount about technology and interoperability. It sounds like a terrifying word. So these are the two big things. It calls on anyone to abide by the service standard, which is actually evolving to become, this is the GDS service standard. It's going to evolve next month. They'll relaunch it as either, we're lobbying for the public service standard, but it might be the government service standard. And we've been bringing local authorities into consultation with GDS to make sure that it meets their needs as well. And then this is a technology code of practice, also a GDS document. And if people have issues with that document as well, do get in touch, because we do have a lot of leverage to make sure that it's meeting everyone's needs, but there are pretty high standards for open behavior, open source, I think is mentioned, let alone kind of open standards. So these are some of the people that co-published, co-authored the declaration with us. It's not just an MHCLG thing. We launched it with 45 organisations, and there's an online sign-up service that we'd encourage every local authority to use. By signing up, you have to make a commitment, so we're also trying to build the community of good-willed collaborators. We'll publish all of the commitments so that you can search what's happening where. We've got a little bit of work to coach people to make specific, measurable commitments. People are kind of saying, oh, we're going to, transform all our services, and that's kind of useless to me, who wants to know what exactly I'll learn, but we're working on that. The second thing that we're doing, in addition to having this common aspiration, 1 minute, okay, is providing a campaign function. So our whole team eventually will be at least 11 people. So we've got the biggest ever coordinating function in central government that's supposed to be helping local authorities collaborate. Comms function here, and we hope to curate, say, like the top 10, top 20 most important collaborative projects. So any common project that's trying to create a de facto standard in a really well-established service area, we'd really want to highlight here. We'll be working with FCC to do that. We have 7.5 million to dish out. You might want to know about that. Only local authorities and central government departments can apply, but they can commission a private company to build the project, with them. Applications we hope will open on the 24th of September. Localdigital.gov.uk will be where everything is, and I'll leave you with that at the end. And then finally, to make sure that we actually know what we're talking about, we want to do some more exemplars. So in the past, I mentioned the Waste Standards Project. We've also, when I moved to GDS, we built some common patterns, common design patterns for common local services. I don't know that this is kind of exemplar we'll end up doing. We're going to be in discovery. Our focus has been on designing a fund to try to stimulate these kind of common projects. It's a fund that, I think it's a fund format that hasn't really existed before. And then once we've got some of those out the door, we'll start our own exemplars, and I think that's it. Any questions?
Sorry for rushing, but we have...
No problems. I appreciate it.
Well done. So, questions for Linda.
It's a lady.
Let's take one from there for starters.
Hi, Glenn Marinas from Huawei. I just wanted to check, what is the timescale for first release of a standard? Because I know we are discussing agreeing standards or getting a standard agreed. So I just wanted to check, when is the first release planned?
For standards?
Essentially, you're talking about various standards. So is there going to be a release or a timescale associated with the discussions?
Well, I mean, we are talking about working...
I can answer from...
that? Yeah.
From a Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government, I need a MHCLG perspective. We don't have a deadline according to which we must have, a particular standard established, or at critical mass, 20% of local authorities must have adopted the waste service standard for us to be successful. But what we are aiming for is that, by this time next year, we want to be able to say that a number of local authorities are reusing things that we have commissioned in some way. So the number of organisations reusing things that are developed by a small few is our target. But because this is actually my 16th week on the job, so we're still early days. the funded projects, so I'm hoping that we get permission on Wednesday to launch the fund following Monday. There's 2 phases of applications. Expression of interest will clump you together with people who are doing similar stuff. Fund closes 18th of November, and then we hope projects start in January. They'll have 3 months to deliver outputs from discoveries, and 5 months from alphas. So basically by like May, June next year, we hope to have some common exemplars kind of in their first iteration. I doubt there'll be anything that we can say, yeah, this is standard yet, but it's a first step.
Very good. I am afraid I need to cut the
Yeah.
questions here because we need to keep the schedule. Thanks, Linda. Then I'll be rude to the next speakers as well, saying that I pack these questions for you, Dan, and the next speaker in one.
Okay.
So just again, to keep the schedule. And the floor is BSI's, Dan Palmer.
Okay, so for those of you that don't know much about BSI, I'll just explain very quickly. BSI is the UK national standards body, which means we're a non-profit distributed organisation. We work under a royal charter with government, and our role is to create standards in the public interest. We also have a big assessment, compliance, training, advisory organisation that works worldwide. I'm not from that part of BSI, and we manage them quite separately, so I won't be saying anything about that. One aspect of our role as the UK's national standards body is that we are the UK member of international standards bodies. So the bulk of the work we do is actually European or international in nature, working through ISO and IEC at an international level, through CEN and CENELED at a European level. We also distribute the ETSI standards, the European Telecoms standards. But a lot of what we do is around creation of a first version of a standard in the UK and then promoting it internationally so that it gets international recognition. Now, a lot of the work we've done that's relevant to cities is in relation to smart cities. We were asked by the UK government to put together a smart city standards programme, and what they were essentially looking at was there was a large number of demonstrators, pilot projects, but there was very little good practice being carried from one to another. So it was really a question of how can you capture the good practice and put it in standards that would allow us to transfer information and knowledge from what the leaders are doing to the other cities. And it was about creating confidence in solutions that work and helping to encourage a better approach to procurement of innovative solutions. We looked at standards at 3 different levels. So and this relates to what Trevor was saying about the types of decisions that cities need to take. We have standards that work at a strategic level, but we also have standards that work at a process level to allow you to organise the processes that need to take place efficiently. And then there's also standards at a technical level. When we look at what we've created relating to smart cities, you probably can't read everything that's on the slide at the moment, but there might be a chance to get the slides distributed afterwards, I hope. But when we look at what we've created, initially when we went into smart cities, a lot of the thinking was it's going to be about interoperability and technical standards. When we talked to people that work in cities, a lot of the challenges they said were it's about the way the city is organised, it's about the way decisions are made, it's about how you bring together the public and private partners and creating confidence about what can be delivered. So our Smart City Standards programme really has 2 strands. The strand on this side of the diagram is very much about city governance and decision-making, and the strand on the other side is very much about using data across the city. So, how you bring different data sets together, the governance models around data, the data sharing frameworks, and issues around data security. I don't need to say too much about PAS 181, I think, because Trevor's already covered this in what he said a little bit. But PAS 181, which has now become ISO 37106, an example of how a UK standard gets translated to the international level, it sets out guiding principles and the governance and delivery processes that a city needs to have. It looks at benefits realisation, the critical success factors you need to have on major city projects if you're going to do it in an innovative way. There it is. And there's more detail, really, which I won't go into, except to say, when we're talking about the guiding principles, what we're saying is smart cities are going to be visionary and citizen-centric. They will have a strong digital element, and they'll also have an open and collaborative culture. And then those principles driven down through the way the city is run, with the appropriate processes in place around how to manage day-to-day business and how to put the citizen at the heart of the services that are being delivered and how to use technology and digital assets effectively. If you take those principles and the processes in place and you use the benefits realisation strategy, that's really sort of the route towards starting to transform a city. Now, I want to be clear, though, that although we've got a programme of work around smart cities, actually there are a huge number of standards in other areas that BSI works on that are relevant in the built environment and the urban environment. So one example, for instance, is the work that BSI has done around standards for BIM, Building Information Modelling. But I could have picked examples around the ISO 19000 geospatial standards. I could even have mentioned the standards work we're kicking off around sustainable finance, as that seems to be quite topical at the moment. So there's a range of standards specifically on smart cities and another whole collection of standards that relate to issues that will be relevant in an urban environment. And one hope we do have for the City Standards Network is in helping to disseminate to cities and companies that work in cities what are the right standards for the right application. Our own work on smart cities is now going forward through the IoT and smart cities community that we've established. And the goal of this community, which follows on from the City Standards Institute we established with the Future Cities Catapult, the goal of this community is really to bring together the different actors involved in specific urban issues, and it's really looking at de-risking investments and accelerating adoption at an early stage, so sort of trying to work through what would really make a difference to the adoption of specific new and innovative technologies, and really looking at the sort of confluence between the IoT, smart cities, the built environment, digital built Britain, and so forth, and looking for actually where can technology make a difference, but what problems is it actually solving? Because all the work we've done to date has really tried to be city needs led. So if we can look at the city needs and the technologies that can help to address those needs. So the types of issue we might take on, for instance, there might be some work around transport and mobility, for instance, focusing on how do you start to work on mobility as a service. Or another issue we're currently looking at in this environment is issues around digital twins in the built environment and how you actually know that your digital twin reflects what's really going on. So a whole range of issues as we move into the digital future for us to be working on. And again, I think a hope for the City Standards Network is that actually it'll surface some of the issues and some of the challenges that we don't have the answer to and help feed the standards programme for the future.
Thanks, Dan. And as said, we'll move fluently to the next one. Sorry about that. And iStand UK, hello. Paul Davidson, stage is yours.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Paul Davidson. I'm the Chief Information Officer of Sedgemoor District Council in Somerset. And I've got a nice 2 hours worth of material, which I shall try and deliver in 8 minutes, so hold on to your hats. I should mention that, yes, I'm the CIO of the council, but I'm also the Director of Standards for iStand UK. iStand UK is an initiative for the local sector. It's actually led by Tameside Council, And you're seeing there that we've got various important bodies on our board. We get our funding from government departments to try and work up standards-based activities. Our mission, it's about promoting standards for efficiency, transformation, transparency of local public services. And our current priorities, by which I mean, what are councils knocking on our door saying the standards we must have are? It's about single view, vulnerable people and households. It's about sharing data in real time for checking eligibility and the like. And more, councils are going through a kind of digital transformation. They want to know what those common core set of capabilities are that enable them to collaborate with other local public sector organisations and people, and what the standards are associated with those. Now, I did have to remind myself what we mean by smart cities, so I popped along to Wikipedia, and I was pleased to find that much of this is about, it's founded on data, either data from citizens or organisations or data from devices coming together to be a shared asset across the city from which we can improve the lives and outcomes of the residents of the city. We tend to think about data in these contexts. Kind of operational data, you certainly need standards for each domain, but it's therefore about sharing that sideways, if you like, with other organisations who don't have the privilege of running the actual service that collects that data, and then aggregating it statistically, drawing out analytical conclusions and sharing those, and ultimately taking decisions on how we're going to improve things, evidenced by that data, and ultimately, hopefully, observing the impact of those decisions and resource allocations that we make back in the operational data. All founded on, you'd like to think, a common, believable, high-quality set of reference data. I think we mentioned lampposts earlier on. Let's talk about lampposts. Let's have one set of lamppost data and connect everything up to that. So we're often talking about that. In my 2-hour version of this, I take a breath and we pause and we discuss this. But let's push on. And the kind of standards that we bump into as we're talking to councils, they're talking about APIs, they're talking about schemas, registers, identity management. There's a fairly random set of types of standards that we talk about, and more so, people are talking about platforms in the same breath as they're talking about standards. So can I collaborate around Verify or whatever? What is the common platform that we're going to use? My own council, I can see you're working your way down my list of standards. We've done an exercise, which I'll get to in a moment, to try and understand how we become that digital organisation, collaborating with others on the basis of standards. That's the list we came up with. But of course, it's an A to Z list, and I'm sure what we don't need is just an A to Z list of standards. When we, at iStand UK, we try and consider solutions that are standards-based along these terms. Again, the 2-hour version of this takes a breath and we look at each one. But I'll just spin through them. We need to understand the meaning of information, clearly the standards there. Syntax is about being able to share data across from agent to agent in a way that it can be consumed. Data quality is hugely important if you're sharing information across organisations. As you share it, you need to be able to explain the believability of the data. Rights management and trust, identity and trust is going to be hugely important when you're working across organisations. Moving data from A to B and doing that in a way that has integrity and resilience is important. And ultimately, it's about behaviours across organisations to work collaboratively and keep the whole thing integritified. Thank you. Just keep going. Now, I mentioned that we did do a bit of an exercise at my own council. Again, if you do want the slower version of this, there's a link there to a video that I did where I speak slower and walk around this diagram. Fundamentally, though, what we've done here is drawn out in the yellow blobs there all of those single capabilities. Do watch the video if you want to. If you want to see each individual one. All of the capabilities that we've identified that will help us to work collaboratively ourselves, but also with other organisations. I picked out a few there on the right. But the point with each of those, and I think I'm going to pick one here, so I've just picked one, a services register. The services that we provide as an organisation. We provide about 300 or so quite separate things you can do with us. And for the communities that live in Sedgemoor, there's other organisations, they're all providing services too. There's a whole community sector providing hundreds of services. What are the services? If I have a need, what are the services? It's the most basic, straightforward piece of thinking about a smart place. What can I do at this place? You'll see what we've done there. We've done this for each of those 33 little yellow things, is considered some user stories about why such a thing is important. But then we've listed what we think are the standards that make that capability interoperable. You're seeing some of those there. Again, the 2-hour version dwells on these, and we go and have a look at some standards. But the point here is that we're associating standards to capabilities, and we've associated capabilities back to user stories, which is the why it's important to us to do it. Now, I recently asked councils, what data do you need? If only you had this data, you could improve things. And you'll see from that list, they came back with a fairly ambitious set of highly sensitive data. And the point is, councils are saying, if we had access to this data when we needed it, and when we have a legitimate requirement for it, we could make a difference. The kind of thing that can lead to, so here's an example from Stockport Council. It's their single view product, and you're seeing here a fictitious Bobby Jones, and Bobby Jones has had various events go on recently, some that the council knows of, but some you're seeing there are from accident and emergency, or they're from the police, from schools, all coming together to give that single view. Now, the obvious point here is that from Stockport, they work with Greater Manchester Police Authority, and they have an arrangement with them to send them that data in the format that Stockport want. But of course, the police authority are going to get fairly tired of being asked 10 times, because there's 10 councils up there, for their data in different formats. So, is there not a standard that we can arrive at for event-level data in a rights management context? Similarly, here's another example. This is from Rochdale. Rochdale have actually used the Smart City Concept Model. I'm sure you're all using that, PAS 182. They've used that to kind of rationalise and refine the data that they have. In this case, they're seeing school absences. That's an event alongside other events from different places. They've pulled that together, and now they can query about people and saying, well, what's happened to them? Where do they live? What other people do they know? By using that kind of higher level ontology approach, more standards. One of the ways that we think this can start to work is by proposing a standard for standards, if you like. 2, that's more than I thought I'd have. A standard for standards. This is actually an example based on data sharing protocols from Leeds City Council as they lay out the data sharing across the city for safeguarding children. But what we've done here is encoded that in a way that makes it machine readable. So, which organisations can share what data sets for what purpose, based on what legal gateways, as long as they're signed up to what agreements. Now, this doesn't exist at the moment. This is all 50-page documents on shelves that nobody ever reads, and therefore, trying to build solutions on the basis of that, well, it's not on the basis of data, it's on the basis of kind of hardwired solutions. So, with my 1 minute to go, what I think what I learned from that as to what I'd love the City Standards Network to be doing is perhaps coming up with that common core set of capabilities that makes a city work. The ones you saw from us, that was from our council, that's what we think makes us work. I think you could probably come up with a shorter set of capabilities that everybody agrees on, because although every city's ambition and vision is going to be different, you'd like to think in there somewhere is a common core set of capabilities that everybody's going to need. I had a look recently at what the Espresso project was doing. It seemed to be doing that kind of thing, and I quite liked what I saw there, both in terms of what the actual capabilities that they came up with, but more the approach, agreeing on capabilities and then setting the standards for those capabilities. If that can lead to a set of capabilities and standards for a city, that might then invite participation from all sorts, big and small. SMEs as entrants, or the big players can all say, yes, I can provide some component into this city because it meets that standard, and I can be the best component of that type. Come use my component. So this makes if there's a city API based on this kind of standards flowing around on a core set of capabilities, that feels to me like an organisation like the City Standards Network feels well positioned to do that kind of work. Well, take a breath and do the next 2 hours. But for the moment, that's me done. Do come to Sedgemoor, spend your money and holidays in Somerset. Thank you very much.
We are doing quite okay on time, but we are slightly behind. I'm wondering whether it would be a horrible misjustice if we take the questions at the end of the whole session after Davor, so we can have a bit more relaxed couple of minutes then. Otherwise, it's just one question again. So last but not least, we hop over to Brussels and to Davor Meersman, who's the director of Open and Agile Smart Cities.
I have my
Stage is yours.
as well. Yeah, thank you. Hi everybody, my name is Davor. I'm the General Manager for Open and Agile Smart Cities. Who here has already heard of OASC or OASC? Okay, so it's a good room. OASC is a network of currently 117 smart cities around the world, 24 countries. We're also adding more and more countries. We were founded about 3 years ago, a little over that, out of the observation that a lot of cities were innovative and were building things, but a lot of the value was getting lost because the observation.
You are not wearing a headset.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I'll okay. So I'll just stand here. Right. I have the inclination to walk. So it was founded out of the observation that the value from these projects was lost. The reason being that simply most cities, in terms of scale, are not enough of a market for local actors to actually build economically sustainable solutions. So out of that, we built an initiative, and Jarmo was also one of the founding fathers of that, together with a number of other actors from the field, that will focus not on kind of building yet another large smart city framework that everybody should adhere to, but would focus on the question of what is the minimally required for cities around the world to interoperate and to be able to exchange services, data, solutions, and so forth. After a couple of years, we grew and grew and grew, and we incorporated last December with 4 partners, Aarhus University, which is also the homestead of our chair, Martin Brinsko, Business Tampere, who run the 6ICA program, probably known to most people in the room. And then, yes, of course, Future Cities Catapult, obviously also known to people in the room. And IMEC, which is the world's largest nanotechnology and digital research center with 3,000 employees at the moment, I think, a little bit over. So how do you manage that? Well, basically, the cities are structured in national networks. Why? Because we believe that we're implementation driven. We try to work with parties who actually build stuff and not just talk about how cool things would be. So part of that solution is having national networks. So one single city cannot join. You have to have a national or regional network. In the UK, for example, we have a Scotland, UK, Wales network. And multiple cities in that region. So first you work on that local level, you figure how things work for you, and then you interface from that level to the international level. And they are then represented in what we call the Council of Cities, and they have a representation on the board of the organization. So that kind of ensures that the demand-driven nature of the organization, because one of the things we saw is that, as we grew, we did increasingly become this kind of demand-side partner for this international tech scene in the smart cities standards space. And if you see where we're located today, you see there's a lot of network physics going on. So obviously we run into a lot of people here in Europe. It's also where we were founded. We have most countries in Europe, but also Australia, Brazil, Mexico, and we are working also on Asia at the moment and further countries in Latin America. And this picture, well, I don't like it because it doesn't have enough dots yet, but I like it because it does show, you know, kind of the amount of cities we have. But it also deceives a bit because it's quite homogeneous, the dots. And it hides the fact that, you know, it's an incredibly diverse set of members that we have. They're all different in size, in language, in culture, in objectives, in resource. Everything is different about each and every member, right? And that's where you need to kind of find the common ground between, because it is a global initiative. And you also have to kind of take into account that, you know, most members are on this path of digital transformation. Yeah? So they are all going away from this kind of brick and mortar admin style management to becoming an innovation platform with a wider ecosystem where they're, you know, just this kind of enabling actor. So, you know, depending on where they are, of course, it's a different story as well. And it means that, you know, the further along that path they are, there's this entire ecosystem behind that dot as well. So that's kind of the complexity, and you know, to me it's incredibly interesting, fascinating that we work with. It centers, of course, around this notion of a quadruple helix and different actors in various verticals. I won't go into that too much. This is an example of how you can kind of structure such an ecosystem in terms of the data layers. You'll have a hardware, a network, a data, and then a user and business layer. Kind of as a stack, helped out with a living lab, either operated by a city or in collaboration. Some kind of incentivization schemes to steer behavior and basically experiment in the cities, ensures privacy and things like that. So, and behind this thing, you see this, well, cities as kind of this smart city and IoT hype cycles are peaking or have peaked. You know, they're increasingly orchestrating. They're orchestrating this ecosystem and all these different requests. And if you then look at, this is just a snapshot of one of an analyst firm of the various kind of up-and-comers. So each logo is a company in various domains that pertain to smart cities. You have AI, you know, there's the smart home, self-driving cars, the smart city domain itself, blockchain, you know, networks, new retail models, and so forth and so forth. So, and that's just a snapshot. Probably, you know, it's kind of slanted towards the US. This snapshot in Europe, it would look completely different. It just goes to show that it's a lot of companies, and they all, you know, have data. They need data, and they're all interfacing increasingly with this city. You can't imagine a self-driving car, which is, you know, with tons of companies involved in its development operation and so forth, not interfacing with that city. We were, so that's kind of the conversations we're having now with the European Commission as well, is kind of how do you interface cities around Europe and the world with this new mode of transport. You know, but then to kind of boil it down, we have a project called Synchronicity, which is the largest IoT smart city project currently in Europe. There's an open call open for projects now. You have 2 weeks, so if you are a quick writer, please look it up. In essence, you don't need to go kind of into really the details of the different blocks. You have a blue block, which is the city, a yellow block, which is kind of the third-party ecosystem. And what we do is define the red blocks, which is where you interoperate, where the cities and the third parties interoperate in terms of data, services, and so forth. So that's essentially what we do. They're called Minimal Interoperability Mechanism, or MIMs. And there's not one single MIM. You can have various MIMs for certain interoperability points. So you define a point, and underneath you kind of have an option or various options of how to kind of achieve interoperability at that point. So The first step is context management, so basically being able to handle different contexts. The second step is shared data models, because obviously context is one part, but if you want to automate, you need to speak the same language. And the third part is kind of a transactional layer, so ecosystem transactions, what we call it. So there are different gradations in kind of the, how OWASP you can be. So at the bottom level is just you with your proprietary solution or closed off system. Yeah, I see. And then so if you implement the context management, you go to the first level, and then the next level, and then at the third level, basically you have everything. So you can manage context, you use the same data models as other parties, and you can transact on that data. So that's currently what we are working on in the context of synchronicity. And then obviously, maybe important to note, so all the standards work we do and the interfacing we do with ITU, with ETSI, and all the different SDOs that we work with, they all then, of course, relate to the different specifications and to those interoperability mechanisms that we define. So that's kind of how we try to manage the flow of standardization. So MIMS for companies create an opportunity to develop cheaply, because you can reuse stuff, build it quickly, and then deploy it at many locations. And for cities, and I've heard talking about it quite a lot, it's a way to avoid vendor locking, because you can swap out things because they are standardized. And it's not only for procurement, it's also for innovation. So when you partner up with your local ecosystem and you build stuff, the things that come out you can actually sell to the 160 in other cities, assuming at some point they'll all be at that level 3 of OWASP, which is not the case today. Quick plug, we have a conference each year. It's ideally positioned at the beginning of the year, so when you do your New Year's best intentions, I don't know the exact word in English, about how all the good things you'll do in the smart city space. You can come and act on that in Brussels. It's kind of the first event of the year. It's called the Connected Smart Cities Conference. And if you want to keep track of kind of these international events and what's going on in that space, we have a Google Calendar that you can subscribe to, where we just list all the different smart cities events that we are somehow related to, and it's a lot. So you can find inspiration there. That's it. Thank you.
So, we have a little time to take questions for Dan, Paul, and Davor, or anybody. You can ask yourselves as well. Who wants to start? Yes. Give me a second. Let's get your mic. Actually, tell also who you are, from where.
Sam Urbagi in University of Kent. I'm a town planner, so you'll know where I come at this, and just trying to connect the dots, and I'll do this very quickly. So Trevor mentioned the challenges in the way cities function. So he talked about digital infrastructure, transformation, citizen engagement, and then increasingly planning on the built environment. So that came towards the end. Linda mentioned plan tech, which is fantastic. But to me, and probably to a lot of people in the profession, that's about process rather than product. So maybe there's two sides to that coin. And again, that's from a planner's perspective rather than from a technologist's perspective. And then the domains that Dan talked about, so transport, mobility, urban sustainability, housing, urban planning. So there's a lot of urban content there. But then there's education, which is fine, and that's where Paul's inputs from the councils came in. They came from education, from exclusion, from safeguarding, from crime and policing. So how do we reconcile on this in a complex environment like a city within the standards? There you go.
I let anybody else but me answer that. Who wants to give it a try? How do we reconcile it? Complex landscape.
Well, that's our job. Okay. But yes.
Linda is ready to take up the challenge.
Linda will answer. But just to say, one of the things we want to do in the City Standards Network is to provide an opportunity to do that. Linda.
I think it's a really good question and a massive problem, but our approach for the exemplars that we've had any permission to run in the past has been to focus on very specific use cases. Like standards are enormous. You know, you want to fix a service area, you're not going to, I don't know, you could boil the ocean, you spend years trying to come up with all the different standards to feed into that particular service. So our approach has been to take a problem like identifying vulnerable under fives, you know, and starting from there and looking at their user needs and not necessarily focusing on data standards in the first instance, but looking at what is the common problem and could we get a few people together to solve that problem in a common way.
So how do you do that?
How do you do that? In the past, I've kind of used the concept of minimal viable collaboration, like a small enough group that's representative enough of the diversity of all the organizations that play in that space. And the way we've identified them is by asking, say we've narrowed down our number of problems, our high-value common problems to one, ideally. We'll say, who's looking to solve this problem in the next 18 months, because no one's going to do any, you know, when you're locked into a particular legacy IT contract, usually we're in the IT digital space, you're not going to be able to do anything significant. And we've come up with a collaborative project plan, you know, some milestones, and got people to work together in fortnightly sprints to do their bit of the user research that's required, and then, but we always have to fund and, you know, like staff a central coordinating thing that tracks the common output and that tries to, you know, constantly publish and deliver. There you go.
Very good. Okay, other takes on that? Yeah, let's start that. Phil, I think it was. Was it? Did I remember right? Yeah.
Hello, I'm Phil Claridge with Mandrill and also help out with Geospot.
I know everybody in the room.
I'm unfortunately one of the geeky technologists that maybe is on the right-hand side of the picture. So the question is really fairly simple. I actually have a day job got to get involved in defining the schemas for some parts of cities, and later maybe the actual way the bits of the city couple together, the ontology of a city. Where should I go to find like-minded people who might be interested in sharing engineering concepts, data, and other things, i.e. the dirty, hands-on part of this?
Okay, Davor is volunteering. What about Paul and Dan? Can you guys help?
Well, I guess it's just you and me then who are excited, excited about all these ontologies and schemas. I think what we tend to find is that there's 300, 400 councils out there, and they each have a particular problem that they're trying to solve. Perhaps this goes to what Linda was saying a bit as well. You know, and I was keen to show some real examples in my slide there, and I hadn't realised they were all from education. I could have picked 10 others, and they would have been, you know, a wider scope than that. What we tend to do is to, when invited by council to help them think through standards, well, you know, they often don't come to us about standards, they're trying to solve their problem. We can see that if we solved their problem just for them, that would help them, but wouldn't help anybody else. So what's on our mind is how can we solve that problem yet make it scalable and work for others? And more so, we tend to think, what is it that's common in this problem we're trying to solve that we could reuse in a completely different setting? That's really what iStand UK is all about. Yeah. Within local government, there's a lessening number of people with those kind of skills. I'm afraid there's a lessening number of people full stop in local government. And the luxury of having somebody who knows what these acronyms mean and can be a professional about them, you know, there's a lessening pool of people that I get to speak to. Nevertheless, there's a lot of passion in local government to do things better with less. So we do have a group of councils that come together in iStand UK with those kind of technical skills. But we struggle, as you do, to find other people that have more than just the vision. They actually have the abilities to do it. I suppose we are looking to industry. You know, what we want to do is to set the agenda, you know, if only we had a way of doing this, we could be so much better. Yeah. You know, and then we look to industry and say, you know, come forward and propose something.
Very good. Dan, isn't that exactly what you are trying to do there?
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting because there are a number of different groups that all sort of get involved in creating standards, and we all have slightly different, and I hope, compatible things that we're looking at. Where BSI tends to get involved, and so the bit where we relate to Paul's work, is around if you're bringing together lots of things from different sources, how you put them together. So we work together on creation of PAS 182, the Smart City Data Concept Model. But we do less work around, sort of data definition or AP. We wouldn't tend to do APIs around specific services. There are other organisations that do that type of work. What we try and work on more is, actually looking at what problems is the city trying to solve, and how then how then do you start to work through, what's the vision, what do you need to put in place. So I think there's quite a bit of bringing different approaches together and seeing who has what approach here, so you probably wouldn't get directly involved in our work, but our work might be relevant to how the work you do is then put together with other people's work. I think that's probably my best explanation for how it fits.
Very good. We need to wrap up now. Sorry about that, because there's a workshop to do. Sorry about it. And thank you. Big hand for speakers.